All right, welcome back. As promised, I'm joined now by one of the good guys. All the guys are good in the fantasy football community, but legitimately a good guy. Bob, is it pronounced Lung?
Lung, yep, just like you breathe with.
All right. I'm so happy I got that right. You guys know I'm terrible at names, and as I mentioned in the introduction, Bob and I sat down on Monday night to record this, and I'm so thankful that he was willing to donate his time to come on this podcast. I love talking to my peers in the fantasy football community, and he's written a really fascinating book that I hope you guys will purchase and check out because it's got some great information in there. We'll talk about that here in a minute, but before we get started, I'm going to bring him in, let him introduce himself to you, and tell you a little bit about himself.
All right. Well, thank you, Sharona, for having me on here. I just been doing fantasy football for a long, long time since 1985 was the first year we did it. So, for those of you keeping track at home, yes, that is before the internet. And so I did everything by hand. Luckily, I worked in an accounting firm which had probably one of the few PCs at the time with like 128 meg hard drive. And so I had Lotus 123 because Microsoft Office didn't exist. And so I created a spreadsheet that shows our scoring every week. And I would mail those in envelopes on Wednesday so they would get them by Friday. They would call their rosters in Sunday morning to my answer machine in my house, which my wife was very excited about.
I bet.
And then that's how we played every week. And
Oh,
so thank goodness the internet was invented so that we don't have to do that anymore. But didn't matter. It was a blast doing it. We always say we were playing fantasy football before fantasy football was cool, and
yeah.
it was neat. The first year we played was Marino's first passing touchdown record was broken
Uh-uh.
when Marino did an 85, and so that was a kind of a big year and kind of exciting. But and our league is still exists. We still have 8 of the original 12 members,
Wow.
and we still play touchdown only, just like we did 30 some years ago.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I started to, the internet was just in its inception. I chose that word deliberately, because it is the matrix, there's no question.
Exactly.
But it was before all the fancy apps and all of that, and
Right.
we turned our rosters in via email, and we held live drafts, and it was a keeper league.
Right. Yep. So's mine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and but it wasn't touchdown only, but definitely had, its own scoring rules, and he compiled everything on an Excel spreadsheet and sent it out, and this was in 2005, I believe, 2005,
Okay.
2006, and in that era. And so that at the time that I ended up leaving that league, it was with I was dating a fella who lived in New York,
Okay.
and it was a group of guys from New Jersey, and that's how I ended up with them. And, he and I broke up, but we remained friends, and the commissioner wanted me to remain in the league, and so I did remain, and it was fun. It
Good.
just, they really wanted live drafts, and
Right.
it got to be very hard for me to get up there to do it. And so, anyway,
Right.
but it was fun. So you've been doing this for a long, long, long time.
Right.
What has been one of the more surprising developments to you?
Um, I have to say that obviously the internet is what made it what it is today.
Right.
Um, just making it easier for people to run their own leagues. It's nice that some of the sites like NFL and ESPN and some of them still do it for free. But I think the thing that I've been most excited about seeing in a transition is two things. One, seeing more and more women be involved in leagues.
Mhm.
You're one of the obviously trendsetters, but more guys have gotten their wives, their
Yeah.
girlfriends, their sisters, whoever to play, and that just makes it that much more fun. Now a husband and wife can watch together and compete against each
Yeah.
other, and that's really cool. But I think the really coolest thing is watching the since
Yeah.
it's now been around for a while, watching the next generation, so watching the dad and his 13-year-old son in a league together, because now you have, family bonding on a different direction. And so, I have, my daughter's friends back when they were 15, 16 years old, and they're, find out that their dad's a fantasy football expert, and oh my gosh, that's great, and I'm playing against my dad and help me win my league, and so it's
Oh,
exciting to see the
yeah.
kids get into it, and I mean, and that's why we're at 40, 50 million people playing
Yeah.
the sport. And I think it's great. The one thing I think that's, if anything's disappointed me, honestly, and I know people really hate me for this, but I'm not a big fan of the daily thing, because that
Yeah.
takes away that league camaraderie and that
Mhm.
that fellowship and that fun time together to trash talk. And
Mhm.
it's legalized gambling, and I know it's a cool thing and people like it and good for them, but it
I
just,
haven't played it yet either.
yeah, I mean, I played a little bit, but I just, there's no fun in it. Yeah, you can win money, that's fun, but again, it's legalized gambling in a sense, and
Yeah, there's a reason
I,
why they're going after it for that.
yeah,
There's no
right.
question. Mhm.
And so I like it. I think it's cool for those who played. Good for you. But I think it just takes away the fun of a fantasy league and the fun that is the whole season. And like you say, getting together to do your draft and that whole camaraderie and fellowship thing. So, like you said, I think it's fun for the people that do it. That's good for them. But I think it takes away from almost the original, scenario of what it was invented for. So,
Yeah, you are right, and it's really been gratifying to me to see more and more women
mm,
getting in there and playing and competing and starting their own leagues, and even more importantly, getting recognition
mm-hmm,
and coming on as voices,
right.
so to speak, in the fantasy football community. And I
Absolutely.
was absolutely the first woman who, girl,
I'm sure
child,
you were if you
female,
played that
whatever,
long ago.
yeah,
Yeah.
who was in this particular league. And these guys were hardcore, man. I
Oh,
had to
yeah.
interview, I mean, he
Oh,
put me,
wow. That's
yeah,
that's that's yeah,
he
that's
put the
intense.
commissioner, and he and I became really good friends. And
Uh-huh.
and I understand it. He didn't want, I think he would have wanted a modicum of knowledge from anyone, but me
Right.
being the first woman, he wanted to make sure that I knew. And I had not played fantasy football, but I was a huge football fan, sports fan
Right.
from the
Right.
time that I
Right.
can remember. But
Yeah.
anyway, and so the first draft was very interesting. Like only two or three guys even spoke to me. And
Wow.
yeah, well, I mean,
Man.
uh,
Well, it was New Jersey too, so
yes,
they
New
yeah,
Jersey,
a little rougher over there.
it was. And so the first year I made it to the playoffs, and
Oh,
that,
very good.
yeah, and
That
and
shut them up real quick, I'll bet.
well, the next draft was much different,
I'll
and
bet.
they were much more accepting of me
Sure.
and all of that. But yeah, it was a great experience, and I still prefer keeper leagues, not
Do
dynasty
too.
leagues. And
And I also prefer auctions over drafts.
yeah, I'm really learning about auctions more and more. That's not been a strong suit for me, just because I hadn't played, hadn't done it as much.
Right. Right.
Um, but now I like keeper dynasty leagues, and I lean more toward those leagues where it's non-traditional scoring format,
Mm.
more
Okay.
PPR and IDPs and
Right.
things of that
Right.
nature. But I don't like to get too crazy with the rules. But this is a great way to segue into your book, which really is, I'm still in the process of reading it. It's really fascinating, and it's kind of reaffirmed some things for me and made me question some things too. But I think the a great starting point, and I don't know that you didn't actually come out and say this, but it's so evident from reading just like the first few pages, is to know your scoring rules.
Right. Absolutely, and that's where a lot of people kind of just assume, oh well, it's PPR.
Hmm.
Okay, well, and then later you find out, oh yeah, and you get 10 points for passing, for if they throw for over 300 yards, or they get points for this, point for that. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, all of a sudden
It
you've
changes
changed the scoring method.
it.
And so yeah, it's very important. I try to explain to people now. I don't track defenses or kickers for consistency because they're usually not. But one of the things I tell people is there's a big difference between a defensive scoring method that is focused on keeping the opponent's team like shutouts and under 10 points versus the ones that are focused more on turnovers. That's two different defenses.
Yeah.
A team that has a high-powered offense like the Packers, who can jump out to a big lead and force teams to throw and get
Mhm.
lots of turnovers, that's better for that league.
Mhm.
But an Arizona or Seattle is better for the team, the leagues that have the more points for shutouts and keeping teams under so many points and yards. Two different defenses, two different scenarios, and people just think, oh well, I should get Seattle. Well, yeah, but Seattle doesn't always jump out to a big lead. That's more the Drew Brees, the Saints, the Packers, whoever. Uh, whole different scenario, and that's what you have to look at, and then take a look at then what you're going after. Um, and so then that's where the whole consistency idea comes in, and that's where the book comes in. And I appreciate that you've gotten some enjoyment out of it so far, and
I've made
I
some
look forward to your
notes.
questions.
Yeah, no, I've made some notes. There's some
Good.
really great stuff in there. But before we get into specifics, there's something I was going to ask you, and Lord, my brain it just. Oh, no, I was going to just say, and I'm not advocating this. I know a lot of other people do it, but for me personally, in those leagues where you do draft a defense or you do draft a kicker, I've gotten more and more to not even drafting unless it's a really really deep league and just streaming them.
Right, right. No, and then sometimes that's just the easiest way to go as well. Again, it depends on your league, depends on your scoring method, depends on how deep your bench is. There's a
Mhm.
lot of situations to look at. Even the Seahawks aren't the powerhouse they used to be
Right.
defensively. They're still good, but they're not what they were a couple years ago. So now this year Arizona seems to be the hyped pick for the best defense, and they're certainly very good. But again, it's not worth picking them over your third wide receiver or your second tight end because you still need to have that depth at those positions that are more important. So,
A lot of times it's your more opportunistic
right,
defense and who they're facing. That's why it's so easy to stream them because, there are quarterbacks who are far more benevolent
right,
to
right.
opposing defenses than other quarterbacks, which is probably a great way to segue in because you had some interesting data in there on Ryan Fitzpatrick. I want to ask you about that. But
Hmm.
before we get there, your book is about the clutch game system, and I want to
Right.
ask you, what was the genesis for this? How did give us your process leading up to it?
So basically, again, being in my touchdown only league, which was all I really had to base it on back in 2002, or in 85 through 2002, but number of years I would be one of the top scoring teams in the league, but my team wouldn't make the playoffs.
Mhm.
And as an accountant who loves crunchy numbers, I started really breaking things down and going, what's going on, and it really came to fruition in 2002 when I had drafted Sean Alexander, and Sean Alexander that year won the Most Valuable Player award, scored
Mhm.
15 rushing touchdowns, and
Mhm.
yet my team at the end of the regular season of 14 games was 7-7. And I didn't make the playoffs, and I just couldn't figure out. I was second in the league in scoring, but I was not anywhere near making the playoffs. And when I looked at his game by game, I saw that he had that magical game on a Monday night where he
Mhm.
rushed for 5 touchdowns. He had two other games where I think there was multiple touchdowns, either two or three in a game. So basically, he scored 10 or 11 of his touchdowns out of 15 in just 3 games.
Mhm.
So spread out those five over the rest of the the 11 games or 11 weeks, and you see that, if he'd been consistent, if he scored just one touchdown a week
Mhm.
for those
Mhm.
14 weeks, I would have been 10-4, made the playoffs, and probably would have won the league.
Mhm.
And I'm like, this whole consistency thing kind of makes some sense.
Yeah, it
So,
does.
so I got all this data and started accumulating weekly data. And luckily, I have a brother-in-law who knows Visual Basics, which is a database kind of thing. And so him and I worked together, and I kind of came up with this consistency concept, and kind of came up with the idea of calling it clutch because each week that the person earns a game, earns a clutch game for you, that's clutch for your team, that's clutch for winning. And the more clutch games, the more consistent, more consistent, the more you win, the more you win, the more you make the playoffs and you win championships. So it all came down to you got to win and you got to make the playoffs. I always say you can't win a championship unless you make the playoffs. So I needed to find that consistency, and so in the book it talks a lot about that. It also talks about it even shows an example out of a league that I had where I showed how the average scoring per week for the teams, and if you just change their average to what if they scored that exact amount every week, how some of the higher teams in the league would have made the playoffs versus not because if they were more consistent or more clutch
Hmm.
versus the guys at the bottom. And so again, I've kind of taken that and build that now into something that I proudly promote. But one of the things I made sure that when I created the tool, which is called the Clutch Report on Big Guy Fantasy Sports website, is that you can put in your own scoring method to determine how clutch players are in your league. Because there's
Yeah,
certainly
that's
people
really
out
neat.
there, right? There's certainly people out there that write about consistency, but
Hmm.
they'll focus on, well, if a quarterback rushes or throws for 250 yards a week and 2 touchdowns, every time he does that, he's consistent. Well, that's great, but what about guys like Michael Vick in the past who threw for 150 yards but rushed for 100? It's a whole different, that he's still very valuable, but he wasn't throwing for 250 yards.
Hmm.
So I thought it makes more sense for that to be consistency by your league standards, not by somebody just general overall standards. So that's why I created the tool that way, and I've been doing that since 2002. I've been doing it now for 3 years, which is kind of like my fantasy football magazine. And I do 175 plus profiles of players, but all of the data for each player is just based on their consistency information, not their. I mean, I do have some actual scoring points, but showing that here's a guy who might score a lot of points, like for example Ben Roethlisberger, but not be very consistent,
Hmm.
and that's not going to help your team at the end of the year if they're fifth in total points, but their consistency is only 50%, which means half the games they're not helping your team.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The the thing that I took away from one of the major things that I took away from, and this is something that I've been thinking about for a while now, and
Sure.
as I went through the Scotty Fishbowl draft,
Right.
it became even more evident to me how much we tend to, and I'm as guilty of it as anybody. Believe me, I drafted Derrick Henry this year, but how much we tend to overvalue rookies as fantasy players and
Mm.
undervalue veterans who
Right.
consistent veterans who are going to get you that one touchdown every week.
Right, right. Exactly. And in fact, this year is the first time I actually did an analysis on rookies, and it's in the book. And it talks about, how people put so much hype on those guys.
Hmm.
And I'm looking at the page now because I pulled it up just by randomness, obviously. But so I did a thing since 2010, and this is only players drafted in the first 4 rounds: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight ends. There have been 255 of those players drafted in the first 4 rounds since 2010. Only 7.8% of them have even earned a clutch rating over 60%.
That's pretty amazing.
Only less than 1% are actually over 90. In fact, the only two guys that ever be over 90% in their rookie season was Odell Beckham Jr. and Le'Veon Bell.
Yeah.
That's it. That's over six years.
Now Cam Newton came close, right?
Well, see, now you would Cam Newton was close, so he was 81% in his rookie year. So he's actually one of the four that are over 80%
Yeah.
in that same time frame, which is only 1.5%
Yeah.
of all those guys drafted. So here's people
And I
putting
know who
all
the
of
other
their
one
hype
is because I
into
was
it.
going to ask you.
Yeah. So needless to say, you will rarely see me draft a rookie.
Yeah.
I mean, you can talk all you want about Ezekiel Elliott. I'm from Columbia, I'm from Ohio, so I know exactly how good Ezekiel Elliott is.
Yeah.
I saw him play for 4 years at Ohio State. But needless to say, there have been many, many Heisman Trophy winners. There have been many, many great college players
Yep.
who have come into the NFL and have gotten a rude awakening, and so have their fantasy owners. And I just try to tell them, folks, here's the numbers. I'm just showing you the numbers. You can believe what you want. The numbers say less than 8% of all players or all position players in the last, um, 6 years are earning over a 60% consistency rate, which if you're not over 60%, you're really not helping your team, to be
Yeah.
honest with you.
You,
And
you
even 60 is marginal. So,
you get better data though if you focus really only on running back and quarterback, right? It's kind of the wide receiver numbers that bring it down.
well, and the tight end numbers as
And the tight
well.
end too,
Yeah, the
yeah.
running backs are actually at 15%. Quarterbacks are a little under 8. Wide receivers are 5.6%, and
Yeah.
then tight ends were 2.3. In
Closer
fact,
than
the
I
only tight end
expected.
that even made it, believe it or not, was not Rob Gronkowski, was not Travis Kelsey, was not any. It was Jordan Reed.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, but and that's pretty amazing when you consider how many games he's missed and his,
right, right.
and obviously you're only focusing on games they
Games
play.
played. Right,
Right.
right.
So that's something that you kind of need to, and he's a fantastic player and definitely a guy that I'll look at,
Oh yeah, no, I love Jordan Reed, and I hope I can get him. But that's one of the things you'll see in the book when I talk about tight ends is, folks, sorry, I'm never going to draft Rob Gronkowski in the first round.
Yeah.
Not when Jordan Reed and
Yeah.
Greg Olson and Delaney
I
Walker and
just
some of
got
these
Delaney
guys.
Walker. Yeah, I just got him like late in the sixth round, I
Oh,
believe.
that's a great pickup. He's
No, I love
back-to-back
him.
seasons. He's been number 2 in consistency.
Yeah.
Back to
Yeah.
back. So I mean, and people are still now. I've noticed this year that his ADP is much higher than it's been the last couple of
It's a
years.
lot high.
Finally,
Finally.
but yeah, last year after he was second the year before, I was drafting him in the 10th round,
Yeah.
and I'm like, okay, I'll take him. Him and Jason Witten, I'll draft them both,
Yeah. That's the
and
other guy that I drafted.
yeah, I
Yeah.
love them both. They both are
Yeah.
very consistent.
Yeah.
They're not, they don't set the world on fire. They're not the Rob Gronkowskis, but every
They're
week they
gonna
get you
get, yeah.
10 points, and that's what wins, folks.
Yeah. I completely agree. I am going to take credit entirely for the Titans signing Delaney Walker because I lobbied them hard in the offseason
Good.
to pick him up from the San Francisco 49ers where he had shown flashes when been given opportunities, but when you're playing with Vernon Davis, he
Right.
was very good at that time. And of course then they imploded. But anyway, and I was really, selling him as a fantasy tight end, and nobody believed me. But of course,
See, you were right all along. Your consistency numbers prove it.
that's one of my few success stories.
That's okay. That's
I
okay.
was a big believer in
Hey, one-hit wonders make a lot of money. That's okay.
I was a big believer in Vance McDonald too, and I see people hyping him
Yeah,
right now. I certainly think he's got the talent,
right.
and could be a Delaney Walker type. It's time for him to pull it all together. One of the notes as I was going through the rookie data and all that, I just made a note that said Marcus Mariota is clutch! Exclamation point.
Yes, he is. Yeah, and he's actually one of the few quarterbacks that actually were over
Yeah,
60%. Again, in the book, you'll see it's Cam Newton at 81% his rookie year, Robert Griffin 67 his rookie year in 2012, and Mariota last year 67%. And and he had the injuries too. So who knows what he could come this year? And they've got a better running game now with
yeah.
DeMarco Murray. And yeah, I tell you what,
And Derrick Henry.
Derrick Henry, right? You guys got some exciting players there. So it's going to be a fun year for the Titans. I'm looking forward to
I'm
watching them.
excited
And
about their offense. I really
yeah.
am. Sigmund Bloom is a good friend and
Oh, he's a great guy.
a
Yeah,
great
great
guy,
writer.
and
Brilliant.
he was on
Yeah.
my Wednesday night show with Going for Two with Zach and Sharona, which I hope you'll join us on that
I
soon.
would love to.
Anyway, he was on the show a few weeks ago, and we talked about the Titans, and he is not very big on the Titans offense, and
Really? Hmm.
no, he's not, and I can
Okay.
understand. Mike Mularkey wasn't a sexy head coaching move for them to make, even though he had been the interim and all of
Right.
that. But I really liked the two offensive linemen that they drafted, and
Yeah.
obviously they've got other talent along that line. And Demarco Murray is very
Hmm.
talented. I do think he tends to be a bit overrated, and I hope that he stays healthy. But with sharing a backfield with Derrick Henry, who I do think is going to get as many touches as they can manage with him, given his rookie status. And
Hmm.
it's going to be, well, I think the concern with him is how well is he going with most rookies? How well
Right.
is he going to pick up the playbook and be able to do his blocking assignments and be
Hmm.
where he needs to be at the right time? And that's usually what gets your rookie running backs lesser playing time.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah,
Missing a block or
yeah,
fumbling
right.
or
Well,
yeah, that kind of stuff.
get your quarterback killed, you will
Yeah.
find you a spot on
Yeah.
the bench every
Right.
time.
Luckily, you have a guy who can move his head, can move his feet pretty well. So.
Yeah, yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out, and especially with the AFC South being where it is. But yeah, I was very excited to see the numbers on Marcus Mariota,
Hmm.
and I had been saying that statistically his rookie season was very underrated. I mean, he
Oh.
had from a statistical standpoint, he had a better season than Jameis Winston, but Jameis Winston was getting all the hype, and so
Yeah.
kind of felt bad for Marcus. Unfortunately, he did miss some games, and I think that that factored into it.
Sure.
What other things do you think that the rookie data suggests?
Well, I think if anything, all it's saying is be cautious. Yeah, and I think what it's just really trying to show is there is potential. Yes, there have been rookies, a few of them, but there have been some rookies that have certainly come in and have been very successful and very consistent. But they were the right situations on the right team with the right surrounding talent. I mean, Le'Veon Bell.
Hmm.
He goes to a Pittsburgh team that's loaded with Antonio Brown and Martavius Bryant and Ben Roethlisberger and a great offensive line and a great head coach. If you have talent, it's hard not to be successful there.
Hmm.
Odell Beckham came to Eli Manning at quarterback. Victor Cruz, was there. Granted, got hurt. But again, Tom Coughlin is the coach,
Hmm.
and he's very talented. But you also have one of the best quarterbacks of all, not of all time, but let's say one of the better quarterbacks of all time. Let's say not best, but better. But so again, putting him in the right situation, um, that certainly helps a lot. It's just one of those where just be careful with the hype.
Hmm.
When people start putting Ezekiel Elliott in the top of the first round,
He went third overall,
I
and
know,
I
and I
mean,
just
it was
sit there and
crazy.
go, and not even talking about the situation now that his ex-girlfriend brought up,
Hmm.
but just how can you put that high of you're really taking a gamble when you could draft, Antonio Brown or maybe not Le'Veon Bell at this point, Antonio Brown or Adrian Peterson, Jamal Charles, all of these people have proven consistency year after year, and yet you'll take a brand new rookie just because he's playing for the Cowboys?
Hmm.
Yeah, I guess there's potential, but boy, that's a heck of a risk to take.
Fantasy players love that P word, that
They do.
potential, that P word. We're
And
going to take a real quick break. When we come back, we're going to answer the question and talk about how you can purchase Bob's book. What can the the book and this data, what can it do for you as an average fantasy football player? So stay tuned in. You're listening to Bat Talk with Sharona. All right, welcome back. All right, so this has been a great conversation,
thank you.
and I really, it really is a fascinating book. But for
Thank you.
the, give me the hard sell for the average, your typical fantasy football player. What can your book do to help them win bragging rights over their next door neighbor?
Well, I always try to tell people that, I am not the footballguys.com or the big sites. I am the fries or the drink to your big meal here. So, I don't charge a lot. I think the book is $5.99 on my website. It's actually on Amazon and Google Play, but it's $7.99 because, got to pay all that
Pay
stuff.
those bills, yep.
But you can come to the website. It's $5.99. It's a PDF download. You can put it on your computer. You can use it anywhere. But you need to use it as a complement. Now, I'll be honest. I use it for, I only listen to me because if I'm going to sell me, I got to win with me. So,
Yep.
but if you every year, if you're a person out there who hasn't been making the playoffs, your teams have been scoring well, but you're just something's missing. This is the book you need because what it's going to show you is while you may like certain players, you can read about why those certain players why their consistency has been killing you
Mhm.
in the past, and you may not realize it. So again, if you owned last year Ben Roethlisberger or trying to think some of the running backs, you know, wide receivers, Mike Evans last year, um, trying to think all the other guys, some of the guys who were, Randall Cobb last year, obviously, where they're up there in points, like for last year, Odell Beckham last year, believe it or not, Odell Beckham last year was fifth in total points, but was 73% in consistency. That's actually his lowest he's ever had.
Mhm.
Um, so that was a killer for some. Doug Baldwin was 10th in total points, but his consistency was only 56%.
Yeah,
Well,
that was just
there's a lot of
surprising.
people right now that have Doug Baldwin, pretty high up
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, he's
And
going
I'm
pretty high.
like, yeah, he had a nice run there, but let's not be too hasty.
You mentioned
Uh,
Mark Ingram in there, and that his ADP is ridiculously high to me.
well, but see,
Even though even
he
though
was
Drew
number
Brees,
one. He was a number one consistent running back last year.
well,
92%. Nobody beat him. Now, granted, he only played in 12 games, but he was 11 out of 12 until he got hurt. If he can play a full season, now that's the issue, is keeping him healthy. But it's those kind of guys. Matthew Stafford last year was eighth in total points, but was 56%.
I had him 1 year as my fantasy quarterback and said never again.
Yeah. Um, there's a lot of hype for Derek Carr. He
Yeah.
was 12th in total points. His consistency was only 50%. Now, can he improve on it? Possibly, but again, got to be careful. But on the other side of that, guys like Eric Decker last year was
Mm.
perfect, 15 for 15. Brandon
Wow.
Marshall was right there behind him at 15 of 16. So, you were talking about Ryan Fitzpatrick. He was actually a pretty consistent
He really
quarterback.
was. It was his
And
best fantasy year, no question. Even though
yeah,
he's usually a very solid fantasy play, as long as you don't play in a league where they really dock you for turnovers,
right,
interceptions, and
right,
things of that
right.
nature.
Last year, a guy like Kamar Aiken was
Yeah.
actually one of the top. He
Yeah.
had 12 clutch games last year, which put him ahead of Alan Hearns, put him ahead of Odell Beckham, Jerry Maclin, Manuel Sanders, Brandon Cooks. He was ahead of all of them. And why, you're sitting there going, okay, well, they got Mike Wallace. He's not going to scare anybody. Steve Smith is a injury waiting to happen, and yet Kamar Aiken's ADP is like wide receiver 65.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if I can draft him late, like I'll tell you right now,
Yeah.
tonight in the pros versus Joes, it's 28 rounds, and then there's no transactions. It's a best ball league the rest of the year. So if you're injured, you get, so you got to get depth. I'm gonna get Kamar Akins for
Yeah.
sure, and
No
hope
doubt.
that pick him up as my sixth or seventh wide receiver, and he might be one of my top receivers for the year
I
if
took I took
something happens.
I took a late flyer in the Scott Fishbowl League, either my last pick or my next to last pick on Philly Brown. I was sort
Sure.
of surprised to see him there.
Yeah, it's really surprising how some people get hype and some don't.
Yeah.
And and like I said, so when I have consistency numbers to show that, like a Kamar Agans, and go, hey, last year, while yes, he was filling in for injured players, that situation hasn't gotten any better. Mike Wallace is certainly not the second coming of Jerry Rice. So why Kamar Akins can't be just as
Hmm.
productive next year, even if he only earns 10 clutch games,
Yeah.
that's still much better than a typical wide receiver 65 is going to come through with.
Yeah, that's a great
So
value for what you're getting. Absolutely.
right. And then the other
Um,
thing in the book too is every profile player, I will explain. There's a little box that says undervalued, overvalued, or at value, to kind of help the person decide whether or not that's a player they want to draft. So it kind of helps because some people ask me about, Bob, can you be a little bit more just outgoing with who to pick and who not? You instead of just giving the knowledge and just let people make their own decision, just say this guy's undervalued, you know, pick him. This guy's overvalued, stay away from him. So I did that this year to kind of help people. And then the one other tool I have in there that may be helpful for people is called a tier draft list. Now, in the back of the book, it's a very small picture because it was an Excel put on the page. But on the website, you can get a free download of the Excel file itself, so you can manipulate it however you want. But what I do is I put players into tiers, and then I actually have a draft breakdown to tell people, okay, if you're, first round, you're going to pick a running back 1A or a wide receiver 1A, and that's all you should pick. And they're listed who those 6 or 7 players are in each position, and that's your first round. And I kind of help people because sometimes people just feel very lost in their draft,
Yeah.
especially if they're doing like a Yahoo where you've got 90 seconds per pick and it goes really fast. Some people just get overwhelmed because they're not prepared for it. So I actually created this for a guy who needed that help, and everybody's loved it. So I put it in the book, and then I update it every week, or well, every time there's a significant change, like Le'Veon Bell. Um, and then it's out there. You can download it right off the site for the purchase of the book, and I'll give you free updates on the tier draft list going all the way through to up to the first game of the year.
Well, it's a great, great, great resource, and I'm really enjoying um, delving into it and looking at all the data. It's so detailed, and it really is fantastic work.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I try to make it detailed, but also simple to understand because, I also play fantasy baseball and there's so many numbers and metrics and stuff
Hmm.
that is just, boy, you really have to be a stat geek beyond even norm. And I always thought I was a stat geek till I just was overwhelmed by that stuff. So I know that the fantasy football world is while they like their numbers, they also like a little more
Yeah.
simplicity. And so I try to make this very simple that,
Hmm.
you look at a clutch rate. If it's over 60%, they've got potential. The higher it gets, the better they are. So keep an eye on that. And, I'm also there for answering questions. I've got my Twitter, I've got, Facebook page. But any of those, you can, hit me up there. I love explaining. I love helping. Nothing makes me happier than to get an email at the end of the year that says, Bob, thanks. Last year I didn't even make the playoffs. This year I won the championship.
Yeah.
So, those are what makes it all worth it. I certainly don't make enough money to quit my real job, and that's okay because I just love doing this. I love sharing the knowledge and try to help people go from, being at 500 every year or just missing the playoffs every year to getting in the playoffs and maybe winning a championship or two. So, that's why I did it originally to help me do better. And I just have loved to share the knowledge over the last 14 years.
Well, it's a great, great, great resource if you're a fantasy football player. I highly recommend it. So, are you a fan of any particular team? You mentioned, are you a Browns fan? You mentioned a
So
lot.
I live in Canton, Ohio, which is home of the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Yes.
Obviously I have to follow my Cleveland team. So that's been a painful, painful world.
I'm sorry.
At least in football.
Yeah.
Thank goodness for our Cavs that
Yeah.
finally came through with our first championship since I was born.
Thank goodness
Uh,
the prodigal son came
yes, the
home.
prodigal son came home and did good. The Indians are doing well and they've had their moments and they've been close. They have a very good baseball team this year, so we'll see how that goes. The Browns, well, hopefully in my grandkids' lifetime, we'll see.
Well,
Uh,
they're going to get Josh Gordon back. That's
That's
encouraging
true. Yeah,
news.
I did hear that today. And they have a good coach finally. I really like Hugh Jackson. I
I
thought it was
love him.
a
Yeah.
great signing.
Yes.
I just hope that the management supports him. It's going to take some time, but if you get the
Yeah.
right talent in the upper management and the coaching staff, and you get the right players through drafts and free agency, you can turn around a team pretty quick in the NFL. But we just haven't done a good job with that. Hence Johnny Manziel. Um,
They've been in such transition for so long.
yeah,
It's hard
yeah,
again, harking back to consistency, right? Until you
yeah.
get some stability and consistency, they're not going to do. I've kept you too long. I'm so sorry.
No,
Uh,
no, no.
uh,
Heck, I could talk for this about this for
I said
hours.
25 minutes, and
Oh,
we're
did you? Oh,
yeah,
I
and here
has
we
it
are
been that
knocking at
long
40.
already? I didn't think so.
Well, I said 20. We would take 25 minutes. We were knocking on 40 minutes. So,
Okay, well, that's fine.
so you play fantasy baseball now. Do you follow hockey? I know you follow
No, so
baseball.
hockey's not a thing in our area. Really hasn't been for a long time. I don't play fantasy basketball, but obviously I like my Cavs or love my Cavs. But no, and I only play in one fantasy league, and it's just been a group of friends, kind of like my football league, that has been around for 20 years. I don't do very well out of it because it's cumulative stats, so there's no consistency in it. It's all about total numbers, and I'm not very good at that, obviously. So I'm always right in the middle of the pack every year, but it's a super deep league. So there's 16 teams, 23 players, 10 players on the bench, and 7 minor leaguers.
Oh,
So multiply that 16 times what is it, 40, and that's how many players are, taken in this thing. And needless to say, even with the help of my fantasy baseball experts, I just can't keep up. And then football season rolls in, and I kind of lose focus. But I
yeah,
love playing it. Like you said, it's just fun to have a different perspective, and it's just a great conversation. It's hard now not to find somebody who plays. If I'm in a room with 20 people, men and women, and I say, anybody here play fantasy football? More often than not, almost half or more
yeah,
play. And
yeah.
again, the women are just as much as the men, and it's just an easy conversation. And sometimes I tell them what I do, and sometimes I just talk with them about, you know, and I don't bring up the fact. But more often than not, of course, I'm like, hey, so if you need some help, here's my site, here's my book, buy it.
So, on the average, how many fantasy teams do you have every year? Just fantasy football.
Just fantasy football. Last year I had 17. I'd say that's pretty much my average, somewhere between 15 and 20.
Wow. Now,
Now,
are any of those best ball leagues?
so this Pros versus Joes is the only one
Okay.
that does that.
That's a lot of work.
Well, yes and no. Like I tell people, most of them are expert leagues.
Okay.
There's only like 4 or 5 that are local friends or whoever play. The rest of them are all expert leagues, whether it's Scott Fishbowl or Pros versus Joes, or I'm going and do the Flex one in New York on August 13th, the Fantasy League of Experts one. Um, but since I really pretty much draft the same players, I mean, within reason, but I have a pretty
You've been
core
doing it
group.
so long that it's kind of old hat.
Well, it is. And
Yeah.
and when you draft the same players, so if I go in and I know, okay, if I have the 11th pick, I kind of have an idea before I even start what my team's going to look like because I know who's falling where ADP wise, and I can kind of go, okay, well, this guy's here, I'll probably take him, and then I'll come back with this. And again, look at the scoring method because that's what's,
Right.
important.
Yeah.
So usually because I have similar teams, I don't have to watch as many, but I do anyway because it's an obsession. And so on Sundays I'm usually there with my phone in hand, or because I have a wife and 3 daughters, so there's not a lot of room for me to watch football.
Right.
So I'm usually hanging out with them, but I've got my phone close at hand, and all my things are popping up. This guy scored, that guy scored, and so.
In that sense, really, technology
Oh
has
my
helped so
gosh,
much.
yeah. If there's been any you know, pennies from heaven. It's certainly been technology and smartphones
Yes.
and, pretty much being able to look at right at my phone and hit 3 apps and know how my teams are doing at any given moment is pretty amazing when you realize that I started with pencil and paper,
Yeah.
a 50-pound laptop
Yeah.
and
Well, I
letter.
walked into my first fantasy draft and I literally had 100 sheets of paper with rankings and listings and all I,
Yeah,
you know, and now information is so readily available and
right.
it's really great.
Yeah,
That,
no, it is.
that
You know, and it makes it fun because then people can come up with their own ideas. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that have really cool twist to fantasy football, and some of them are out there, and some of them are completely unknown. And I've run into them, and some guy asked me one time, "Well, how did you get to be where you're at today?" And I said, "Well, honestly, I got in before it became too big." I said, now it's very difficult to be a fantasy expert per se and to earn any street cred because there's
so
so many
many.
people doing it.
Yeah.
And I said to the guy, I said, well, if you want to really do this, for a hobby or whatever, you've got to come up with something like I've got,
Hmm.
something different, but something simple at the same time. Because as I said, everybody can look at targets and everybody can look at, points per whatever. And it's just creating numbers, but you got to find something, Pro Football Focus and Number Fire, and some of those guys, they've come up with their own twists and their own things and made themselves successful. And,
Mm-hmm.
and they're certainly more successful than I am, but I just have gotten the street cred of just being in it long enough, knowing the right people, and I'm honored to even be recognized with guys, and playing in leagues with guys like Signa Bloom or David Dodds or David
Mm-hmm.
Dory from the Huddle or or Bob Harris. I mean, those guys are like my idols, and I'd be sitting beside them and going, "Oh my gosh, I'm in the same draft as these guys."
Mm-hmm.
And it's even more awesome when I win the league, and I have. But it's just but all of them are great people. There's no egos out there.
Yeah.
I've met almost all of those guys. I haven't met Sigmund, but they're all great people, and they're all very humble, and they're even still amazed that they've made a living out of that, and good for them. So maybe someday I'll get there, but I just love doing it, and if it ever gets to that point, good for me. If it doesn't,
Well,
I'm
look at
just as
Matt
happy.
Waldman. He's,
Oh,
yeah,
well,
he's a
Matt
great.
Waldman, Mike Clay. I mean, Matthew Berry. Let's be honest. Matthew Berry was, had his own little site, called Talented Mr. Roto in, the late 1990s or early 2000s, and he was just one of us at that point, and became Mr. ESPN. Now Mike Clay's there, and so there's just so many people that have been put in the right opportunities and have taken it and went into a level that we'd all live for, and good for them, and like I said, while I'm jealous, I'm still very happy with my life and very happy with just being able to do this and doing podcasts with people like you and others and just sharing the knowledge and
Well, it's a
you
great
know
community. It really
it
is.
is. Oh, it is. Yeah,
Fantasy
absolutely.
football community is the best out there. Tell everybody where they again the link to your website where they can find you on Twitter and how to purchase your book.
Gotcha. So website is bigguyfantasysports.com, and my Twitter is at Bob_Lung. And the book is again on the website. It's only $5.99 there, where you can get the PDF and the Excel of the tier draft list. It is available on Google and Google Play and Amazon, but it's $7.99 there.
Yeah,
You can actually buy a hard copy
they
off.
gotta add those fees so they pay their bills, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But again, you can do that. You can email me at Bob at Big Guy Fantasy Sports if you have any questions. But I just ask that get the book, try it out. If you're looking for something different, to help you, this is a great add-on. Again, it's the fries to the Big Mac. Do this, combine them, and try it out. And if you have questions, just email me. I'll be more than happy to help you. Some people catch it right away and do well with it. Some people, they struggle a little bit, and I'll help them, and then they'll catch on. And so just I'm a pretty easygoing guy. You can email me. I sleep sometimes, so be careful with that. But beyond that, I'm there to help and try to have people understand and have another follower or fan that is excited about using something new and different. And when they beat their friends and nobody knows why, they can just smile and go, "It's my secret," and that's it.
We're definitely going to be tweeting out links to your website and
Thank
to
you.
your Twitter account. Let everybody know how to buy your book. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
We're gonna get you on going for two here soon.
Definitely love to.
All right. Have a
Thank you,
great
Sharona.
evening. Thanks. Bye
All
bye.
right. Goodbye.